The morning they came for my dam, I was standing in my kitchen with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the water golden. I'd lived on this property for 32 years, long before the Riverside Meadows HOA even existed, long before the McMansion sprouted up like mushrooms after rain on what used to be farmland. My dam wasn't just some decorative feature. It was a functioning piece of infrastructure that my grandfather had built in 1967, designed by an actual engineer to manage the creek that ran through my 5-acre property and continued downstream to what eventually became the subdivision. The dam created a small pond on my land and regulated water flow during heavy rains, preventing flooding in the low-lying areas beyond my property line. But according to Patricia Hendricks, the HOA president, my dam was an unauthorized structure that violated the community's aesthetic standards. I first heard about their concerns 6 months ago when Patricia appeared at my door with her clipboard and her practiced smile. "We're updating our architectural guidelines," she'd said, her eyes scanning my property with barely concealed disapproval. "All structures visible from community areas need to be approved and registered." I'm not part of your HOA. I'd reminded her, not for the first time. My property was here first. I was grandfathered out of the HOA when the development went in. Her smile had thinned. "Nevertheless, your dam affects the aesthetic cohesion of the neighborhood. We'd like you to remove it, or at least hide it behind appropriate landscaping that meets our standards." I closed the door on her then. It was a mistake to think that would be the end of it. The letters started arriving weekly. First, they claimed I owed water management fees for my dam's impact on community's drainage system, fees that had apparently been accumulating since 2019, though I'd never received a single notice until now. Then they threatened legal action. Then they sent their lawyers. I hired my own attorney, a sharp woman named Rebecca Torres, who laughed when she read their claims. "They're inventing fees for something on your property that they have no jurisdiction over," she said. "They don't have a case. Don't pay them a single cent." I didn't, and that's when things escalated. The morning they came, I heard the trucks before I saw them. I ran outside in my slippers to find 2 excavators, a dump truck, and a crew of workers in hard hats gathering at my property line. Patricia stood there with a man in a suit, her lawyer, I assumed, and a police officer. What the hell is going on? I shouted, running down my driveway. Patricia held up a document. "We have a court order to remove the unauthorized structure for unpaid fees and violations of county drainage regulations. You were given ample opportunity to comply. That's my property. You can't." The officer stepped forward, hand on his belt. "Ma'am, there's a court order. Please step back." "Let me see that." I grabbed the paper from Patricia's hand. It was stamped and signed by Judge Morrison, a name I recognized. His daughter had just moved into the subdivision. My hand shook as I read the legal jargon that essentially gave the HOA permission to demolish my dam, to protect community water resources, and ensure proper drainage management. "This is insane," I said, pulling out my phone. "I'm calling my lawyer." "Do what you need to do," Patricia said, her voice syrupy with false sympathy. "But the work is beginning now. We've been more than patient." I called Rebecca, but it went to voicemail. I called again. Nothing. The excavators were already moving on to my property, crawling toward the dam like mechanical monsters. "Stop. You can't do this." I ran toward them, but the officer caught my arm. "Ma'am, if you interfere, I'll have to arrest you for obstruction." I stood there, helpless, tears streaming down my face as they tore apart what my grandfather had built. The excavators ripped into concrete and stone, breaking apart the carefully engineered structure that had stood for over 50 years. Water began spilling out uncontrolled, gushing to the growing gap. It took them 4 hours to completely demolish it. When they left, my pond was draining away, and the creek was running wild, unregulated, rushing downstream with nothing to slow it down. Patricia paused as she got into her car, sunglasses perched on her nose. "You should have just paid the fees," she said. "This could have all been avoided." That was Tuesday. Wednesday, it rained. Not a downpour, just a steady spring rain that lasted most of the day. By Thursday morning, I started getting phone calls. The first was from Marcus Chun, who lived in a house closest to the creek. "Is everything okay with your dam?" he asked. "There's water pooling in my backyard. It's never done that before. They destroyed my dam." I told him. The HOA demolished it Tuesday. There was a long silence. "They did what?" By Thursday afternoon, the calls multiplied. Water was pooling in backyards throughout the lower section of the subdivision. Basements were starting to take on water. The retention pond at the community park was overflowing. Friday brought more rain, and by Saturday morning, the disaster was undeniable. The flooding wasn't dramatic. No homes washing away or anything that would make the news. But it was persistent and insidious. Water seeped into foundations, creating standing pools that wouldn't drain. The community's drainage system, designed with the assumption that my dam would regulate the creek's flow, couldn't handle the sudden volume of uncontrolled water. Sinkholes began appearing. Small ones at first, a depression in the community center's lawn, a dip in the jogging path, then larger ones. A section of Willow Creek Drive collapsed overnight, leaving a crater 3 feet deep and 6 feet across. The soil in the subdivision had always been unstable. It was built on reclaimed wetlands, which was why the original developers had worked with my grandfather to ensure proper water management. Without the dam, the water table was rising, saturating the ground, finding every weak point in the earth beneath those perfect suburban lawns. By Monday, the HOA had called an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, but Marcus came to my door afterward, his expression grim. "They're trying to figure out what to do," he said. 3 homes have serious foundation damage. The sinkhole on Willow Creek caused a gas line rupture. They had to evacuate 4 houses. Patricia's lawyer is telling her they're looking at millions in damage. "Good," I said and meant it. "She's blaming you," Marcus continued, "saying you neglected maintenance on your dam, that it was going to fail anyway." I laughed bitterly. That dam was inspected every 2 years. I have documentation going back decades. They destroyed functional infrastructure because of invented fees and injured pride. Tuesday morning, Rebecca finally called me back. She'd been on vacation with spotty cell service. When I explained what had happened, she was silent for a long moment. "They did this with a fraudulent court order," she said slowly. "Judge Morrison had no jurisdiction over this. We're going to bury them." The lawsuit I filed Wednesday was just the first. By Friday, 17 homeowners in the subdivision had filed their own suits against the HOA for the damage to their properties.